All right, good evening. I'd like to call to order the January 18th meeting of the Harbor Commission. Would you like to call roll, please?
Yes, Jim Sloan.
Here.
Bill Spicer.
Here.
Betsy Kramer.
Here.
Merritt McRae.
Here.
Shoham Yaniv.
Here.
Lang Sly and John Stedman are absent tonight.
Okay. Any changes to the agenda, Scott?
Mr. Chair, no changes this evening.
All right. This is when we would normally do public comment that is not part of an agenda item. And I don't see that we have any slips, so we will close that. Moving on to approval of minutes. All in favor?
I abstain.
Okay, I'm sorry. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
I abstain.
Okay. All right, Harbor Commission matters. Scott?
Well, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, it's my pleasure to announce that tonight we're reseating Jim Sloan, who's been chair for quite a while now and has been with the Commission since December of 2009. So thank you for your service, Jim. Commissioner Sloan has served on the Budget Committee for years and also the RFP Committee and maybe a couple others that I'm not remembering it right at this moment. But again, we appreciate your service and that you signed up for a couple more years of punishment.
All right, well, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
This is the biggest crowd I think we've ever had here. So,
Just for you.
yeah. Thanks everybody for coming to hear me be reappointed. Now, the director's report, Scott.
Okay. Well, the waterfront obviously was spared the tragic circumstances of the recent Thomas fire and the following mudslides and flash floods and so forth. But we have been able to pitch in a little bit. On Wednesday, January 10th, Public Works Department called with an urgent need to deposit mud removed from Coast Village Road and Coast Village Circle, which are actually city streets. So we had them dig a slight pit in West Beach and put a little berm around it and start bringing the mud. And the theory was that it would be sorted there, the mud from any kind of debris, and then the mud would be taken out to Goleta Beach to help nourish Goleta Beach. In reality, it's been used very little. A lot of it that came right off of those streets was quite clean and went straight out, to most of it to Goleta Beach. So we were available to contribute to that. We had another request today for some more material from the county, which is mostly liquid, which we'll use it as a sort of a settling pond of sorts where it'll percolate into the sand, and once it dries up enough to be handled better, then it'll be shipped out to another location. Additionally, that Wednesday, we received a call from the fire chief that they needed an additional four-wheel drive vehicle. Well, he reached out to all the departments, but we could spare a Harbor Patrol vehicle, four-wheel drive. Evidently, they were short, so he's had that ever since, and hopefully we'll get it back in decent condition. I understand he already blew 2 tires in the thing, so he's already had to purchase 2 new mud tires for our Ford Explorer. Also, Caltrans has pushed back its announcement of when the freeway will be reopened. They're hoping for Monday, January 22nd, but that's still an open question at this time. We did Sea Landing called, and we allowed them to do the ferry service with Island Packers from Ventura to Sea Landing without charging any percentage rents on that. We just let them do their thing. And this was done during the La Conchita slide, as you might remember, in 2005, and worked pretty well, but for a much shorter time period back then. So we've had some employees, Carl, taking advantage of that service. And actually, we didn't have too many employees on the other side of the mud. So we've had a couple Harbor Patrol officers in Carpinteria getting through now by train and so forth, one of our facilities maintenance folks, and one of Carl's assistants, Teresa Lawler, our engineering technician. So we've been able to operate under full staffing. The swell is supposed to come up and the weather's supposed to deteriorate a bit tomorrow, so I don't believe the Island Packers Condor Express will be running. But with any questions, the public can call 963-3564 and speak with Sea Landing and get the latest schedule. And that's 963-3564 for Sea Landing to find out their schedule going forward. For the February meeting, we'll have a 2019 budget overview for your first peek at the budget, and hopefully we can get the McCormick's fuel dock lease on the agenda as well. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I had a couple. So has the county started to deliver anything on the beach today? Do you know?
Mr. Chair, not as of this afternoon. I think they're waiting for some more. The State Regional Water Quality Control Board approved it, and I think at this point Public Works is waiting for the County Emergency Operations Center to order it. Okay. Because it's county mud, it's not city mud. So.
Okay. And then I also noticed that you can go on, I went on the Condor Express website, and they list both the Island Packers and the Condor Express schedule. I don't know if Island Packers has the same thing. I only went to that one. So rather than call, if somebody calls after hours, they can go to the website. So anything else? Okay. Facilities report.
Good evening, Chair Sloan and Commissioners. Bellingham Marine Industries continues making good progress on the final phase of the Marina One replacement project. Phase 8 consists of the replacement of A, B, C, and D fingers. B and C fingers were done first. They were completed just before the holidays. D finger is just about done. It's a little bigger. It will take a little bit longer. It should be done in a couple of weeks, and then they'll finish up with A finger, which is the commercial fishing dock, by the end of February. Typical, just like all the others, they start out with demolition for each dock. They install the docks, install the utilities, and they've become a well-oiled machine. They're very, very quick, and before you know it, the new docks are in, and they look great. Just as a reminder, we relocate all vessels that are displaced by construction within the harbor. So that has worked quite well for every single phase, and we're looking forward to finishing this up in a couple of months. The change order work has been minimal for this project, so we have quite a bit of available funds to do other projects that need to be done. And for example, this is sort of a unique project. QR and S finger were constructed in 1998. It's a different docking system, and we've had some difficulties with some of the utilities associated with it. All of the utilities are located down the center of the dock, including the domestic and firewater lines. That little box you see there is the only access about every 30 feet to look at those. So if there's a leak between those junction boxes, you can't fix them. So about 5 years ago, we had a leak in the middle of the dock of the firewater system and already had to replace it. As you can see, there's not a whole lot of access. And we spent about $90,000 putting the entire firewater system on the outside of the docks. And that's what most docking systems have. That's what the new docks are set up that way, so they're accessible. This is just showing, it's got some barnacles on it, but just how we hung it off the sides, and that's feeding a standpipe for a fire hose cabinet. We recently had a water leak near Q finger, and this was the access to it. There, believe it or not, there's a valve in there that was leaking. You couldn't get to it. You can see how cluttered it is, and it's just impossible to maintain. So before we have a complete failure, we've decided we need to move forward with replacing the entire system. We feel it's just not reliable, and once the water goes off the QR and S fingers, there's no water to the restroom, to any of the docks or anything, and it's very, very difficult to replace and repair. So we have received a quote from Bellingham Marine Industries, our contractor, to go ahead and replace this. And it's going to include separating the water feed to the Marina One, it should say east restroom, excuse me, and remove the existing PVC and pipe and firewater lines in each of those junction boxes and install HDPE domestic water lines, which is a more reliable product, and that's what we use in all the new and modern docks. It's about $94,000. It's pretty pricey, but I think it'll result in a very reliable water system for that docking system. The docks themselves are structurally sound. They're going to last many more years, 20 years at least more. But the water system, if it were to fail tomorrow, I wouldn't be surprised. So we feel this is a prudent use of our change order funds. Channel Islands Marine and Wildlife Institute, you received a presentation from them a couple months ago. Their SIMWE is authorized to conduct marine mammal rescues, and they've been doing so for several years, but they don't have a facility to operate out of in the harbor. As some folks know, the Marine Mammal Center used to operate off a dock on the Rock Groin. They had installed a dock and a gangway many years ago, and didn't do a lot of maintenance on it, and it got to the point where the gangway itself fell into such disrepair you couldn't use it. It's hazardous to walk down. So we couldn't really provide a facility for SIMWE without doing some much needed replacement of the gangway for the Rock Groin dock. We recently completed that just last week. It's a brand new dock built by Topper Industries, like most of our, it's a brand new gangway, like most of our gangways. It's going to facilitate marine mammal rescues. We're currently in lease negotiations with SIMWE for the actual use of this dock. It's the logical thing to do with it, so Scott's been working with them on that. Trinity Construction recently installed the gangway. They're out of Big Bear. They did a great job. We received 4 or 5 bids on this, and their low bid was $46,000. And fortunately, the existing dock is in good condition. It's kind of a unique dock in that it's held down with mooring chains as opposed to piles. But it works great. The facility is ready for use, and then when Scott completes those negotiations, we'll expect SIMWE to operate out of that facility for the foreseeable future. And that completes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Go ahead, Richard.
Will the new dock be accessible to the Wildlife Care Network as well?
Chair Sloan, Commissioner Kramer, I'm not 100% sure what the arrangement will be between the Wildlife Care Network and SIMWE. I would assume had there been a relationship with Wildlife Care Network and Marine Mammal Center in the past, it would be something similar, would be my expectation. Scott may have a comment on that. I really don't know.
Commissioner Kramer, that has not come up in discussions yet.
Okay, well, I'm hoping that it will be.
Anything else? Was there any damage to the wharf in that storm that we had a week ago?
Chair Sloan, nothing. And we replaced brand new water lines and had scaffolding under there, and nothing happened to it, so it's holding up just fine.
Wow, good. Okay. Moving ahead, harbor operations.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Well, after 30 years with the city, including 12 as a Harbor Patrol officer, 3 with the fire department, and 15 as Harbor Patrol supervisor, Steve McCullough, Harbor Patrol supervisor, retired, hung up his badge on January 11th. After what can only be described as an outstanding career, he plans to retire with his lovely wife, Rosanna, and remain in the Santa Barbara Goleta area. So we all wish him well. I look forward to going fishing with him on his boat now that he won't be office-bound all of the time. I'm sure I'm not alone. Prevailing in a very competitive recruitment, Eric Engebretson has been appointed the new Harbor Patrol supervisor. After starting as an hourly employee on Stearns Wharf, Eric has 26 years as Harbor Patrol supervisor, quite the veteran there. He's earned wide praise for his professionalism and the rapport he's established with the harbor community. Eric brings with him a trove of experience and training, is especially valued for his mentorship qualities and with newer officers. So I hope you all welcome Eric to the new position. He's a familiar face. You'll see him on the docks. Please say hi to him and welcome him to his new position. We're very excited to have him, and I'm enjoying the transition already. He's a great guy with a lot of superior professional capabilities. So thank you for that. Although we did survive the storm in the harbor pretty well, and of course all our thoughts and prayers go out to those who were so horribly affected by it, We ended up fairly unscathed, except for 3 vessels that came aground during the southeast winds, the prefrontal southeasterlies that accompanied the storm. And I'm happy to report that as of today, all 3 of those boats are off the beach. The beach has been groomed and cleaned, and we're ready to move forward and cross our fingers and hope that the next southeaster doesn't send as many boats to the beach as this one. None of them came from the mooring area. They came, I believe, all from the winter anchorage, what we call the year-round anchorage, or the county, but I believe they all came from the year-round anchorage, and so we got those all cleared up, and we worked with the owners to get that done. And again, once again, Eric, the new supervisor, was on top of that in an excellent fashion and helped get that accomplished. And that completes my brief operations report for this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Just want to offer my congratulations to Patrolman Ingebrigtsen for taking command.
Yeah, I would echo that and wish Steve the best of luck in retirement. Anything else? Okay. Moving on to item 6. Jeanette, would you like to read the recommendation, please?
Item 6, appeal of Waterfront Director's decision to withhold issuance of a business activity permit for 6 passenger charters to Mr. Paul Norrie. Recommendation that Harbor Commission deny Mr. Paul Norrie's appeal of the Waterfront Director's decision to withhold issuance of a business activity permit for 6 passenger charters because issuing the permit would not be in the best interest of the harbor.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, before I begin tonight delivering my report, I have a couple of items, a couple of notes to advance to you. First, I want to begin by introducing colleagues of mine on city staff who have joined us here tonight, starting with Mr. Scott Vincent. Mr. Vincent is Assistant City Attorney. He's sitting in the attorney's box, if you will, where the city attorney typically sits during city council meetings. Mr. Vincent's role in these proceedings is to represent you, the commission. If you have legal questions relative to procedure or options or anything relative to the legal aspects of what your role and responsibilities here tonight, Mr. Vincent is here to assist you in that regard. I'm also joined on my far right here by Ms. Sarah Connect. She's also Assistant City Attorney with the City Attorney's Office. Ms. Connect's role is to represent staff in these proceedings. So if there are legal questions that pertain to the staff report or questions advanced to staff, Ms. Connect is here as our legal representative. And finally, on my direct right is Harbor Patrol Officer Jessica Gray. Ms. Gray was one of the 2 responding officers to the accident that we'll be discussing tonight, the boating accident. And she is here to offer any questions relative to, answer any questions relative to that accident. She was also the author of the vessel accident report that you find as an attachment to your staff report. That report is required by the state of any accident that results in damage exceeding $500 or medical or injury that requires medical attention. And I believe Officer Gray has a few words to say before we continue. And after she's through, I just have a couple more notes before we begin as to procedural notes and protocols as the way we expect it to proceed tonight. Officer Gray.
Good evening, Commissioners. I just wanted to say that on July 2nd, I was the one that, along with my partner, dispatched to Stearns Wharf from Fire Dispatch on a report of a vessel that had collided with the wharf. When I arrived on scene with my partner, the vessel was already gone, but I was the one who I observed the damage to the wharf. I interviewed witnesses on the wharf. I looked at the photographs. And from the photographs from Christopher Foley, one of the witnesses, I was able to identify Mr. Norrie as the operator of the vessel. So my partner and I then went to Mr. Norrie's slip where we found him there. We interviewed him there. We interviewed the witnesses that remained, and then I was the one who wrote the vessel accident report in the normal course of my duties based on my observations. And that was submitted to the Department of Boating and Waterways as well as to the U.S. Coast Guard because Mr. Norrie is a commercial operator.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just a couple other notes relative to how we would expect to proceed this evening. So with your consent, what we'd like to do is the following. I would deliver the staff report. I estimate it'll probably take somewhere in the neighborhood of a half an hour. Then, of course, we would encourage you to accord the same amount of time that we take, whatever it is, to Mr. Norrie and his representative here tonight, followed by approximately 5 minutes allotted to city staff for rebuttal, and an equal amount of time allowed for rebuttal by Mr. Norrie and his representative, after which I would respectfully suggest that you entertain public comment on this particular item, and after that, the commission could certainly go ahead and ask questions of any of us or Mr. Norrie and his representative, and then enter your own deliberations and come to your decision. If that meets your needs, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, we're ready to proceed.
Yes, please go ahead.
So business activity permits in general. So the Santa Barbara Municipal Code provides that anybody conducting commercial activity in the Harbor District needs to have a permit, must be permitted to do so. The Business Activity Permit Program dates to 1992. The program is specifically targeted to individuals and businesses that don't have brick and mortar leaseholds in the harbor to be able to do service work, kayak excursions, and six-pack passenger charters in particular. So these are the folks who sort of work around the edges, don't have huge businesses, but are vitally important to and provide vitally important services to the waterfront as a whole. The program, the BAP program, also includes a Harbor Commission approved policy document, which is attached to your staff report, and I won't go into the details of that, other than to note that the policy says that the reason for the BAP program is to promote business through the harbor area in a safe, orderly, and professional manner. Annual BAP permits run from August 1st through July 31st. As I say, they're issued annually, August 1st through July 31st. And most importantly, Section 4 of the BAP permit policy states that it's within the waterfront director's discretion to grant or withhold issuance of these permits for any reason or if deemed in the best interest of the harbor. A subsection of Chapter 17 of the Municipal Code describes an appeal process for denial or revocation of a business activity permit. The policy also is also intended to ensure that charter permits issued to responsible, reputable permittees to conduct business in a safe manner, complying with all boating laws and Coast Guard requirements. This is particularly pertinent to the charter BAPs. So the charter BAPs, some specific regulations. The Waterfront Department limits that to 12 permits at any one time. That's, of course, so that we don't have so many small charter operations out there that they intrude on the leasehold privileges and rights, quite frankly, of the larger operators, Sea Landing, Santa Barbara Sailing Center, and what have you. They're only issued to slip permittees for designated vessels and particular designated assigned slips, the slips out of which they operate. And the applicants must possess a current U.S. Coast Guard license to carry passengers to receive one of these business activity charter permits. So the current proceedings, why we're here tonight. Mr. Paul Norrie's held a charter BAP since 2003. He's also held a service BAP. That's that category I described that's for engine work, hull clean, underwater divers who clean hulls, folks who do bright work above deck and what have you. He's held a service BAP since 2005 in addition to the charter BAP that he's had since 2003. Mr. Norrie has reported no charter BAP income since 2008, not to the Waterfront Department at least. Mr. Norrie currently holds a valid 2017-2018, that's that August 1st to July 31st period, BAP for service permit only. And that's because on September 8th of last year, Waterfront Director Scott Reedman denied issuing Mr. Norrie a charter BAP because he'd been cited for reckless boating operation with passengers aboard during a July 2nd, 2017 accident at Stearns Wharf. Mr. Norrie's serious boating accident included slamming into the Stearns Wharf Y, pitching 3 people overboard and causing over $21,000 of damage to Stearns Wharf, including the replacement of 2 pilings in total and a stainless steel ladder leading up to the wharf. A Stearns Wharf video plus witness interviews plus witness photos are all described in the vessel accident report that I referenced earlier and was also referenced by Officer Gray. Regarding the Stearns Wharf video, the Stearns Wharf footage, the video camera is on the north end of Stearns Wharf. This one is. We also have one on the south end. And the footage is kept in the normal course of waterfront business to capture incidents and events on or near Stearns Wharf. And I'm going to show you this twice, if you will, not to drive home any point, but just because it goes pretty fast. And so this was the video from the Stearns Wharf north camera of the accident in question. Whoops, excuse me, I apologize. There's Mr. Norrie's boat coming in, attempting a left-hand turn, and you can see a digger rail there, and by that time, it's pretty much over. I'm going to show that to you one more time. So that was a live visual footage from the Stearns Wharf north camera of the incident. You can see people starting to move to the east side of the wharf because they know something's happened there. So at the same time as the video was taking that footage, there was an individual named Christopher Foley who was on the wharf who took a series of dozens of pictures of the accident beginning when Mr. Norrie entered the Stearns Wharf Y area in its broadest area, continuing all the way through the accident and to its aftermath. And here are a few photos in sequence depicting the accident. Here's Mr. Norrie. There are 7 people aboard, including Mr. Norrie, and 6 passengers. Here they are headed toward the Y. You can see they're starting to bank in an attempt to make a turn. Here they're engaging and continuing to make a turn. You can see that the wharf railing is still the wharf ladder is still intact. Here they're digging a rail, and we're beginning to see people fall overboard. The woman on the port side bow on the left is about to go in. And if you notice right here, I'm going to use the cursor, there's a woman who has red jeans right here where the cursor is. Well, here she's starting to go overboard. The woman on the port bow, she's already underwater, her feet sticking in the air, and the woman in the red jeans is now upside down in the water. And if you'll note, where she goes in the water, she's approximately, I'd say, 5 feet from the dual prop stern drive propeller, turning at high speed. I don't think I need to describe to you what staff's interpretation of the risks are here. I'll let you decide that for yourselves, commissioners. This is the aftermath of the accident. The woman in the red jeans is actually being assisted up a ladder to Stearns Wharf. She's being assisted by, I believe it was her son, who was a passenger on the boat, who jumped into the water to make sure his mother was okay and assisted her up the wharf. So regarding onward with our proceedings here. So the denial of the BAP was due to the irresponsible boat operation that you just saw and failing to meet the expectation to perform the duties of a charter boat operator in a professional and safe manner, whether operating a paid charter or not. That's staff's position and was the reason a cite was issued, and we'll get to that. But to note, for the record, these passengers were friends and acquaintances of Mr. Norrie. They were not paying customers, okay? We want to make that very clear because I know that'll be an issue that's probably of interest and will be discussed tonight. So in terms of reflecting the vessel accident report as it's attached to your staff report, it occurred at about 6:40 p.m. on July 2nd. The video recorded, it was a 24-foot rigid-hulled inflatable. Basically, it had a fiberglass rigid hull with inflatable pontoons in the middle. It was operated by Mr. Norrie. It entered the wharf at about 20 knots, and it was powered by a 210 horsepower dual prop stern drive system, okay? So there weren't twin propellers, but there were twin propellers on one shaft, if that makes sense. In other words, they weren't on two separate shafts. 6 passengers plus Mr. Norrie. None wore personal flotation devices, also known as life jackets. None were wearing life jackets. Mr. Norrie attempted the banking left turn, as you saw in the video and in the stills, but slammed into the wharf instead, unable to complete that turn. Severely damaged 2 pilings, as I mentioned, and the metal wharf ladder. 3 passengers were pitched into the water. And after accounting for all the passengers, with no serious injuries to any of them, Mr. Norrie then drove the vessel, did not report it to Harbor Patrol, but drove the vessel west through the Stearns Wharf pilings and back to the harbor. He didn't call patrol, which was actually Harbor Patrol, as Officer Gray, I believe, mentioned earlier, was dispatched to the scene by Santa Barbara City Fire Department. Contacted by Harbor Patrol at the vessel's slip following the accident, Mr. Norrie exhibited no signs of intoxication. You can see that as an attachment to your staff report. He said, and during an interview with him at the slip, that, and the parens are he, it was actually I in his words, he just thought he could make the turn to port, and he made a mistake, misjudged it, and ran into the piles. From photographs and witness interviews, Harbor Patrol determined that Mr. Norrie had violated the following: failure to operate at a safe speed and take action to avoid collision, damage to harbor property, failure to report damage to property, life jackets not appropriate for all passengers, and not readily accessible. All of these are elucidated in detail in the vessel accident report. There's an explanation of each of these violations. I just captured it in relatively, so to speak, bullet terms here. So the grounds for non-issuing of Mr. Norrie's charter business activity permit. Based on these violations, Harbor Patrol concluded that Mr. Norrie, quote, was operating negligently and clearly endangered the lives of his passengers. Therefore, he was cited under Section 655A of the California Harbors and Navigation Code. And it's a misdemeanor offense. This was forwarded to the Santa Barbara County District Attorney's Office, who elected to suspend filing criminal case against Mr. Norrie, instead allowing him to participate in a misdemeanor diversion program, which he completed, and evidence of that is also included in your packet. And he also paid restitution for the wharf damage through his insurance company. It was actually an insurance company that paid. On July 3rd, Harbor Patrol Supervisor Steve McCulley and Harbor Patrol Officer Gray visited Mr. Norrie at his vessel in the slip. Mr. Norrie at that time then asserted that a throttle malfunction had caused the accident. He demonstrated at that point, Harbor Patrol didn't put their hands on the throttle or the steering wheel, but Mr. Norrie demonstrated that the throttle and steering controls operated normally, putting the vessel in forward and reverse, and turning the wheel to starboard and port. No defects were noted at that time. On September 12th, Mr. Norrie appealed the waterfront director's decision not to issue him a charter BAP, and the grounds of his appeal were that the accident occurred during non-charter boat operations, plus the vessel failed to slow down due to a throttle misfunction. Those claims are in the attachments to your staff report, advanced by his lawyer, Ms. Sweeson. So, in conclusion and staff recommendation, Harbor Patrol concluded that Mr. Norrie was operating his vessel negligently and clearly endangered the lives of his passengers. He failed to have appropriate life jackets available and accessible to all passengers. And he damaged public property and failed to stop and report the accident. His after-the-fact assertion of a throttle misfunction is simply not supported by the facts. For example, on the day of the accident, he told Harbor Patrol, and I'm repeating here, but for the record it's important, he thought he could make the turn to port, but he made a mistake, misjudged it, and ran into the piles. He did not mention a throttle malfunction. Number 2, after crashing into the wharf, Mr. Norrie successfully maneuvered his vessel with passengers back to the harbor, an unlikely decision for an experienced captain if a throttle had malfunctioned. Number 3, no passengers interviewed or anybody interviewed on the wharf, but in particular, no passengers interviewed mentioned any mechanical problems as a cause for the accident. In fact, the general consensus was that Mr. Norrie misjudged the turn and hit the wharf. And again, no throttle defects were noted the day after the accident when the Harbor Patrol supervisor and Harbor Patrol Officer Gray visited the boat and interviewed Mr. Norrie. The Santa Barbara Municipal Code and adopted policies say that the waterfront director may grant or withhold a BAP issuance for any reason or if deemed in the best interest of the harbor. The director withheld issuance of the charter BAP and, based on Mr. Norrie's irresponsible boat operation and the resulting accident on July 2nd, 2017, that pitched those 3 passengers overboard and significantly damaged Stearns Wharf. Mr. Norrie's actions causing the July 2nd, 2017 accident were reckless and irresponsible and reflected extremely poor judgment that could have resulted in serious injury or death to several people. Mr. Norrie's explanation that the throttle stuck is simply not credible. Given the inherent responsibilities of a charter BAP, they should only be issued to persons whose boating behavior, either under the auspices of a BAP or not, should be exemplary, with a record untarnished by avoidable accidents that endanger lives or property. Issuing a charter BAP to Mr. Norrie, therefore, would not be in the best interest of the harbor, as noted in the BAP policy, and his request for such a permit should be denied. That concludes my report. I'd be happy at this point to turn the microphone over to Mr. Norrie and his representatives.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, good evening. My name is Catherine Swissen, and I'm representing Mr. Norrie, who is also present here. So on July 2nd, 2017, Mr. Norrie took his friends on a ride on an inflatable vessel. The occasion was his friend Kelly Clenay's mother's 70th birthday. There were 6 passengers. They were not paying passengers. This was a friend's outing that afternoon. And the boat had 11 life jackets on board. Mr. Norrie and his friends went out for a short ride. They left the harbor and headed west to Ledbetter Point, then drove the tender east to the pier where Mr. Norrie intended to go into the Y, turn around and stop, looking at the scenery, before turning back to the visitor slip in the harbor. The vessel in question, the inflatable vessel, was anchored in a temporary slip on the harbor, in the harbor. When approaching the Y, Mr. Norrie reached for the throttle and brought it back to slow down. The boat slowed down, but not as it usually did. What caused the problem? We don't know. It is true that he was able to return to the harbor with his passenger. It is true that the next day there was no malfunction, but he experienced something that happened that made the boat react in a different manner than it usually did. So he had to make a decision as to what to do in a split second, basically, and he turned the boat sharply to avoid having the passenger being ejected on the starboard side toward the pier. And when the boat bounced back from the pier and the ladder, 3 passengers fell in the water on the inside. Mr. Clenay's mother, the woman that you saw climbing on the ladder, decided to go on the pier, and her son jumped in the water to assist his mother up there. And from there, they walked back, and they were no longer at the location when the Harbor Patrol came. The other friends who were in the water were held back on the boat. You can see on the pictures that you've seen and also in your package that the boat was idle in the Y, that Mr. Norrie put the passenger back on the boat, made sure everybody was okay, everybody was wet and a bit shaken up probably. So was Mr. Norrie, and it's reflected in the report that you have. And then they proceeded to go back to the harbor where they anchored the boat, and then 2 of the passengers left at that time, and the other two, the two women passengers, went back to Mr. Nouri's boat. Mr. Nouri lives in the harbor, and they went back to the slip where the rest of the party actually was there, and that's when he was contacted by the Harbor Patrol. At the time of the accident, Mr. Nouri noticed that the ladder was bent, but didn't know about the pylons. It was his intention to report the accident to the Harbor Patrol, but first he wanted to take his passengers back to the harbor so they could change and get wet. Nobody was injured in the accident, although people fell in the water. There was no injuries. Nobody said that they had any injuries. I think the consensus from the interviews of the passengers is that it was an accident. Nobody described any reckless behavior on the part of Mr. Nouri during the interviews. There has been some mention about the personal flotation devices. There were personal flotation devices on the boat. It's reflected in the report. I believe there was one Type 3 personal flotation device and 10 inflatable ones that were in a red dry bag under the seat on the boat. Okay, and it is our position that those were readily available should they be needed. There is no requirement that passengers in a boat wear a personal flotation device if they are older than 12 years old. Obviously, Mr. Nouri was concerned about his friends, and that's why he returned to the boat to the harbor. He said in the report that he intended to report to the accident. His intention was actually to go to the Harbor Patrol office. The officers arrived at his slip, as his permanent slip, before he had a chance to do that. When he was contacted, he immediately said, yes, I was involved in an accident. He also disclosed the name of all the people who were on his boat. He didn't try to hide anything. And I think that I believe it's Officer Gray noted in her report that he was shaken by the accident. And, that is the first time in his 22 years in the harbor that he was involved in an accident. Okay, so he was cited, but I think it's significant that the district attorney's office decided not to file charges and decided to allow Mr. Nouri to do the diversion program, because that shows that the district attorney has, in its evaluation, thought that the situation did not warrant an actual criminal prosecution, and I think that's a significant factor. Now, the business activity permit policy states that it is the policy of the Harbor Commission to promote business throughout the harbor area in a safe, orderly, and professional manner. And that, as was mentioned before, that the fact that there are limited numbers of BAP, charter BAP issues is to, in part, ensure that there are not too many of them, but also that the charters are granted to responsible and reportable permittees only. Well, Mr. Nouri is such a permittee. He has been, as we heard, the holder of a charter permit since 2003, and his charter permit was renewed every year except this last time. The charter services he offers in the packet that I submitted, there is a picture of the boat that he charters. That is a 57-foot vessel built in 1969 in excellent condition. You have a glimpse of the kind of services that he offers. It's more of the high-end kind of cruises or day trips or overnight along the coast and to the islands. And he does about 10 to 20 trips per year. He has been operating his charter operation since for the past 14 years, and he has never been involved in an accident. He has never been the subject of complaints. He has never been cited for any violation. In addition, Mr. Nouri has been a part of the harbor community for 22 years. And similarly, he has had no complaint during that time. He has not been cited for any safety violation. And actually, he's held in high regard as a seaman, as an individual in the harbor community. And you can see, I think that the commissioners, you noted that there were audience today. And a lot of the people here, all those people are here in support of Mr. Nouri because they are part of the harbor, community. Now, I submitted a number of letters on his behalf, and I'd like to briefly go over those letters. So Tom Parker, who is present here today, over there, is the president of the Hutton Parker Foundation, and in his letter to the commission, he is stressing Mr. Nouri's commitment to safety, and he states in his letter, "I have known Paul Nouri for well over a decade. He has run our powerboat and their charter business for much of that time. He has always shown tremendous responsibility towards his passengers at all times. Safety has always been at the forefront of all decisions I have seen Paul make during the operation of the boat. While I did not observe the incident in question, I feel certain that if Paul is saying that the boat malfunctioned at some level, I believe him. He has been one of the most careful and responsible captains I have known in my lifetime. We have traveled thousands of miles with Paul, and he always was the one everyone looked at to make decisions while on the ocean. His judgment concerning safety in all matters concerning the boat and ocean have never been questioned." We also submitted a letter from William Atkins, who has known Mr. Nouri for 14 years, including 12 as a customer. Mr. Nouri has captained his yacht on trips totaling over 25,000 miles. He has also mentored his 6 children, and he also expressed complete confidence in Mr. Nouri. I'm quoting, I can without hesitation vouch for his talent and character. I would not hesitate to put him in charge of any new vessel I buy. He has become a great friend and a member of my family." Paul France of France Construction echoes Mr. Atkins' opinion. He has known Mr. Nouri for 10 years. He has always known him to be a person of high integrity and a very capable and responsible seaman. I'm quoting, "Captain Paul successfully ran my boat charters for several years, taking many very satisfied and returning clients out to the islands and up the coast on trips of one day and many multi-day trips. His sea knowledge, understanding of boat mechanics and operation, combined with his kind, calm demeanor, make him the best person to be with on and off the water. I would recommend him to all without hesitation." Joey Coito, president of Santa Barbara Triathlon, who is also present today, has known Mr. Nouri since 1993. And he has known him both on a personal capacity but also professional capacity because they were in the business of creating travel experience for clients. And Mr. Nouri's role in the operation was to design safe and adventurous recreational programs. And again, Mr. Coito is stressing Mr. Nouri's commitment to safety. He says, "I can recall many company meetings when Paul would suggest modifying a route or program to improve the likelihood of a safe outcome for the clients. During those times, as well as now, I believe Paul to be a conservative individual who would always err on the side of caution when it comes to the safety of his clients, family, and friends. I consider Paul to be a responsible individual. Given that fact, I find it difficult to believe that he was driving recklessly." Finally, William Cordero, who is related but not the same person as Mr. Cordero, who is going to speak in the public comment section, also have known Mr. Nouri for 17 years. And that is the letter that I just submitted tonight. And he says, as my captain, he has always been diligent, able, conservative, and safe. We have covered together our oceans on big and small boats, some by sail and other by power. I have been in every kind of situation with Captain Paul on the West Coast, on the East Coast, or Channel Islands, and down and around the tip of Baja, Mexico. Paul Nouri cherishes his friends, cherishes the ocean and his life. He's smart, fun, responsible, and safety is important to him. So in addition to that, the record of no accident, no citation, this is the only thing that has happened in over 22 years of being involved in the harbor community. Mr. Nouri is always at the ready to help others in need. And actually, he was recognized by the city of Santa Barbara in 2014 for the actions he took when someone had fallen off the stern wharf in the middle of the night. And I included actually the city of Santa Barbara recognition of what has happened in the packet that I submitted. He has also helped the Harbor Patrol many times. And I gave a couple of examples. Helping tow a boat that was docked next to another vessel on fire to allow better access, or helping towing a boat when the Condor Express was on fire. The reason I'm saying that is that Mr. Nouri is a responsible individual. So he's a 22 years resident of the harbor. He's represent the harbor well, and he's always there to help and to be there when needed. And this was an accident, and nobody was injured. The city was compensated for the damage to the pier. I think that it is clear from all the testimonials that were submitted that Mr. Nouri is the last person who would engage in a reckless behavior. He's outgoing, and I think that Michael Brundesh, in one of the letters that was submitted also today, points out he's outgoing and gracious with his client. He's a great representation of Santa Barbara to the visiting clients he brings to the harbor. Chartering the charter permits law, it's part of Mr. Nouri's livelihood. That's what that's part of what he does in addition to the service permit, which is not that issue here. I would submit to the commission that based on the circumstances, he should be allowed to continue to provide charter services to the harbor. This was an isolated incident. I think that he has demonstrated that he is engaging in a responsible manner in the charter operation. There has never been a problem with the boat that he charters, which was not the vessel that was used. So thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners.
Mick?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In response to Ms. Sweeson's presentation, I have a few comments, if you'll permit me. First of all, Ms. Sweeson described how Mr. Nouri was shaken up and intended to call the Harbor Patrol. It would have taken probably 3 seconds to key the microphone and say, Santa Barbara Harbor Patrol, I had an accident at the Y. And we would have been there probably before the woman in the red jeans was being helped up the ladder. So in our view, this wasn't responsible behavior. This was leaving the scene of an accident. Relative to Mr. Nouri's Ms. Sweeson's reporting that he takes 10 to 20 folks a year, 10 to 20 charters a year. These are our records of Mr. Nouri's reporting, charter reporting since 2003. By our records, he has not reported any charters since 2008. Okay, now maybe he's taking people on charters, maybe he's taking them from somewhere else, or maybe he's not reporting them to us. I don't know what the answer is exactly. All I can tell you is, combing our files, he's reported no charters since 2008. regarding the notion that nobody was injured and everything's okay and we should give them a business activity permit, excuse me, I'd like to refresh the commission's memory with this photo right here. Is this a minor accident where nobody was injured and it was just a minor affair? Or was this an irresponsible act of boating operation where somebody could have been killed? Right? That's our perspective. And it's also our perspective that renewing his business activity permit, and this is why we didn't, wouldn't be in keeping with sound public policy. It would just be inviting further endangerment to the public. And I know as a staff member who's been in these discussions for months with my colleagues, we weren't prepared to do that. Because this is not a minor accident. You can see one individual on the starboard side is making a Herculean effort to keep his beverage dry. This isn't funny, it's not cute, and it's not minor. It's a very serious lapse of judgment and a very seriously negligent accident. That concludes my comments, Mr. Chair.
All right, any other comments?
Briefly.
Okay.
Your Honor, I go to court too much, Mr. Chair. First of all, there has been some mention that Mr. Nouri did not report any income. I mean, we dispute that. I know that there was an issue that the paperwork was not in the file or lost, but Mr. Nouri has done that. It's a requirement, actually, I think, that every year you have to submit. Yes, submit the paperwork. So why the paperwork is not there, I have no idea. I am not trying to diminish the fact that people fell off the boat or anything. I'm just trying to place the accident into context. There's a different view of what happened and why it is that it happened. It is, the accident, Mr. Nouri took action that he thought was in the best interest of his passenger, and the result is that nobody was seriously injured in the accident. And yes, I heard that he didn't take the mic, the radio to call in. That wasn't. He took care of his passenger. He returned to the harbor. I think that he probably would say they didn't even think about calling in there. But the fact is that you have to do that. I think that the language is without unnecessary delay. And I think that under the circumstances, taking care of the passenger, putting them back on the boat, returning to the harbor so they can be taken care of and dry is not unreasonable. Thank you.
All right, what was next in order?
Mr. Chair, I think public comment and then questions from the commission to either city staff or Mr. Nouri and his representative.
All right, we have one slip here from Bill Cordero to speak. You have 2 minutes, Mr. Cordero.
Chairman Sloan and fellow commissioners. I'm Bill Cordero. I'm eighth generation Santa Barbaran, former slip holder in the harbor. Was an employee of City College for 31 years, vice chancellor of student services up in the state for all the community colleges. But most importantly, I'm here to discuss Paul and the incident took place, and also, in my opinion, your role. I was elected to the school board twice, and I was a top vote getter at each time. And we had many recommendations made to us by the superintendent and staff and by our council. We had Honorable Tom Anderley be our legal counsel during my tenure as a school board member. It was our responsibility to review all the data we had put forth and make decisions. We did not always concur with the superintendent or the superintendent's staff. We made our independent judgment based on what we thought was the best interest of students, like you're doing for the best interest of the harbor. And that's a long-term thought process, not one incident. Paul Nouri is a fine individual as a human being, but he's also a very skilled captain, and he's demonstrated that many times over, and you had evidence presented to you of that tonight. But more important for me is Tom also cares about the community. He looks after our tourism and our local residents, but he does things extra and above. And it's such an important time to mention that what we're going through right now in our community. I'm a fundraiser for a single-parent charity that looks after abused moms and their children. Paul has consistently been a provider of his boat charter, and that thing, when we raffle it off, earns over $1,000 every time we do that. So he's not a taker from our community, he's a giver. And we need more people like that, and we need to support people like that. Now, I'm not minimizing what took place, but I am suggesting that you have discretion in how you view that. And I am suggesting that that's your role to do that independently of what you're being recommended and reach the best decision you think that's for the people of Santa Barbara, Paul Nourier, and what he brings to the table and how he helps others. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't see any other public comment slips, so we'll close that part of it and open it up to questions from the commission. Okay, please.
I have a question for you, Mr. Reedman. How would you, define what are the best interests of the harbor? I appreciate that you cannot renew the permit, but as long as it's not in the best interests of the harbor. What are the best interests of the harbor? Why would this not be?
Safe operation of the vessels. This was a very serious accident, not to be taken lightly.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
So,
I have a question for Mr. Reedman. Would Mr. Nourier be able to reapply in future years, or does this mean that he can't ever apply again?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Yaniv, he would be able to apply in the future, and
Excuse
probably.
me, could I interrupt? I don't mean to cut Mr. Reedman off, but I could answer that question, and maybe it's appropriate for this table to answer that question, if that's all right. And I can't see your name, so I apologize for that. But through the chair, Mr. Nourier is able to apply again in a year when these permits are annually issued, so he's free to apply in a year, and we will staff would consider his application on the merits again at that time.
how many of the charter permits are outstanding? Are they all full?
Mr. Chair, I do not believe we've had a waiting list in quite a few years.
But we have 12 outstanding currently?
No, I believe we have vacancies. I'm not sure
Okay.
at this time, but we've had 1 or 2 vacancies for quite a while. We haven't been fully subscribed. 6? Mr. Cronman tells me we have 6 in operation right now, which would mean 6 open permits.
Okay, great, thanks. And then I had a question for, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Matt.
How much business does a charter BAP holder typically do in a year on average? How does Mr. Nourier's business compare to others?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McCray, a lot of folks get into this thinking they're going to make a lot of money and find that not to be so and then fall out. What you saw in between 2003 and 2008 on the slide that Mick had up there is significant income for a charter operator, I would say. We have a charter fishing boat that does 6-pack charters, who's probably second to that. Most of the rest of them don't make that much revenue. However, we don't really know. In the later years, we have received reports that say no charter activity this year. We have a couple like that, and otherwise we don't have any reports on the level of activity that's been done. But when he has been operating, that's pretty significant.
I had a question for Ms. Sweisen. Since we don't have records of what the revenue is, do you have any idea of what the revenue is over the last 5 years?
I think I'm going to let Mr. Nouri answer your
Okay,
question.
please. Please.
About 60,000 average. Hi. About 60,000 or something average.
$16,000 a year.
60.
How does that, can you put that slide back up for a second?
Mr. Chair, if you'll allow me, I quite it, according to our records, and we have a property management specialist who follows this quite closely, and for lack of a better expression, hounds folks to turn in their reports and their earnings. I would find it somewhat remarkable if we had all these years and did not have all the paperwork reflecting the earnings that Mr. Nouri has described.
Yeah, I understand that, and that's not really what I'm asking. I'm asking what the revenue is. Could you put that slide back up for
Sure.
a second? 60,000. So the revenue jumped from 2 years of 18 to 60,000 for, I mean, we had one banner year, obviously, in 2005, but then the rest have been in the mid-teens. And so that jumped to 60,000?
That's what you estimate.
That's about what I estimate from what I saw on my last P&L. The last few that I looked at it, that was about where it was.
Okay.
So I went back a few years. I mean, like 3, 4, 5 years since I've been doing it. And then that's about what I anticipate.
Okay, I have another question. So I understand from the photos in the report that after the boat was taken back to the harbor, it was subsequently hauled out on a trailer and fixed, I guess, at some point.
Yeah, so I just want to specify that I didn't flee the scene.
No, right. No, that's not my question. My question is so did you replace the throttle? Did you replace if the throttle malfunctioned, did you replace the throttle?
I didn't replace the throttle. I was told like there was an issue with the throttle. Either it was like the mechanism in the throttle or the fuel pump or the carburetor of the engine or the cable, which is just the cable, the grease cable. And that was the first time using the boat. So the boat was like a serious lack of use.
Right.
And as you know, a boat is like use it or lose it.
Right.
So this was like just not getting enough exercise. So can I explain what broke? Why did it happen? No. But it obviously didn't work.
Right.
Because I'm a pretty safe guy. So, but it just something might function.
Did you have a mechanic look at it? Did you have any work done to the throttle?
The boat is not yours, right?
The boat is not mine. I sold the boat.
Oh, okay. The boat isn't yours?
The boat is not mine
Oh,
anymore.
okay. I thought the boat was registered to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Nouri is no longer in possession of that boat.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. And that was a misunderstanding on my part.
Get rid of the boat and then.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'm curious, how long was your trip in total, and how long were you out on the water before the incident took place?
5 minutes.
Total?
Yeah, 10 minutes total maybe. I left the harbor slowly and just went to Ledbetter. Looked, no surf, I just went back down along the east side of the pier. Didn't do any donuts like I was to report like that guy is just like, to me, lost credibility. So I was just like going around, and I kind of done it like hundreds of times for 20 plus years.
And the
Just
boat
gonna turn
functioned
around and
properly.
stop.
The boat functioned properly during that time.
During that time, it was fine.
Okay.
My other dinghy, I got a problem with the issue. I got to replace that throttle because it's sticky. And but anyways, that time it did happen. And when so the boat did slow down. Otherwise, I mean, I would go like 50 miles an hour, which you can see I was not. I would go like 15, 20, and then but I brought it back more to I'll make the turn and just. It might function. It just didn't. The boat didn't slow down like it always does.
Understood.
And so I was like, I had to make a quick decision. My decision was keep everybody safe. That's number one. Nobody got hurt. Keep everybody safe. And then so I offered basically the underneath part of the boat to hit the pylon and then turn it off right away. So because I didn't want anybody to get hurt, so nobody got ejected onto the pylon, but we hit, and then as we're coming back, that's when people fell off on the inside. They just fell off the boat. They didn't get ejected. They just fell off, which is
Right.
very unfortunate. And then Kelly's mom, he was like 70-year-old, her birthday.
Right.
So she decided to climb up the ladder and walk home. And then the other person fell in, was cold. So I decided to just take them home because they were cold.
Thank you.
So why didn't you call Harbor Patrol on the VHF? On the way back to the harbor?
Think about it. I was gonna, as soon as I get them back to the boat, I was gonna walk to the office in my head. I was just gonna walk to the office and report that because I knew I didn't see the pylon. I didn't know there were an issue.
Right.
But the ladder was obviously bent, so I'm like, I'm gonna have to pay for that, and I'm gonna deal with that, and it's gonna be more than $500, so I'm gonna go report it. But I didn't have time. I mean,
Right.
they were right on their job. I mean, they showed up at the step of my boat. I mean, within minutes.
No,
So
I
I didn't
understand.
have a chance to go report it.
Right.
Otherwise, I would have.
Well, normally, I mean, you're an experienced captain. If something happens on the sea, one of your first things you do is pick up the VHF and call the Coast Guard when something happens. And so that's the reason for my question. I understand you wanting to look out for your passengers and get them back and get them warm and things like that. I certainly understand that, and
We
that's commendable.
In the harbor, basically. We're in the wharf in the
Yeah,
harbor.
but you knew
so
a bunch
were,
of people were
so
on the
close, and
wharf
that's just-
staring at you, and there was going to be a big commotion. I mean, it was obvious that someone was going to show up pretty soon. So
And also, I'm in a dinghy,
yeah,
basically in a dinghy, so I didn't even know if that VHF was working or not. I mean,
okay.
it didn't occur to me. I didn't think about it because I was going to just walk to the harbor
Right.
office.
Understand. Okay. Questions, Merritt?
At what point did you shut the engine off as you were coasting into the...
So right after the hit, then I turned the engine off, and then helped Madison, I think, get back on the boat, and then when I decided to drive back to the slip, I mean, after nobody got hurt, everything was fine, everything is okay. Decided to go back to the slip. I think if that throttle malfunction again, I had the clearance in mind, I can turn the engine off and paddle back to the harbor. But, so that's what we're thinking.
Okay.
So before I restarted the engine, I mean, I exercised a few times, and I think that's what unlocked it
Right.
and made it work.
Show up.
I have a question, I think, directed to the Harbor Patrol Officer, Wolf. What is proper protocol in a situation like this where a small boat operator does have either throttle malfunction or an issue with their boat and the operation in such close proximity to a wharf or a building? What is an individual supposed to do?
Commissioner Yaif, are you asking what he should have done when he thought the throttle was malfunctioning? Turning off the engine immediately would have been my first thought. And then I wasn't sure. Were you asking what he should have done immediately after?
No, what he should have done once he noticed that the throttle did get stuck or it was malfunctioning.
Yeah, if that was what was happening, then turning off the engine would have been the solution.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Well, so we have a recommendation.
Mr. Chair, one point of information, if I might. It's our understanding that the boat was registered to Mr. Norrie at the time of the accident.
Is that true?
That is true. What we said is that after the accident, the boat was...
Okay. Yeah,
Sorry.
please come back up.
Yes, what I said is after the accident, the boat was then taken into possession by one of the co-owners who then kept
Correct.
the boat, and Mr. Nouri didn't have any dealings with the boat
No.
Okay.
afterwards.
Well, then it gets back to my question is what action did you take to repair the throttle after the boat was taken back to the harbor? Did you replace the throttle? Did you have a mechanic look at it? I mean, what action was taken?
Selling the boat.
Selling the boat?
Selling the boat. So, I mean, they asked me to, fix it, but I mean, I'm in the boat repair
Right,
business,
right.
but
Right.
I just, for the insurance purposes, I didn't want to touch anything.
Right.
Because I wanted like the surveyor to look at the boat and figure
Okay.
it out on just like, and not touch anything. And then decided to sell the boat, and then they put new tubes on it, on
Right.
stuff, on deal with it then. But, so I don't know.
Okay, so in the
Did I pay to fix it? No.
in the survey, were any mechanical defects noted?
There was no survey.
There wasn't?
There
I
wasn't.
thought you just said that you wanted the surveyor to look at it.
The claim adjuster for the
Claim
insurance
adjuster for the
company.
insurance, correct, yes.
Oh, okay, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
The insurance adjuster.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay, I
And
thought
that's
you meant
something we
marine
don't look at
survey.
because
Okay,
it's hard to explain.
right. And we're just trying to understand.
Yeah, yeah,
so.
right.
Okay, Merritt?
I have one last question. I have held a master's license for 39 years now.
Yeah.
Why would you come into the Y at 20 knots?
$15, $20. I mean, I came to the Y just to, again, I've done it like hundreds of times, and just like, and my intention was just like to turn around and stop and look at the whale at the museum, and it's a nice place, nice and quiet, and then go home. So, no, I mean, I've done it many times, and I've never been an issue. It was safe. If I see if there's any boat going through or any boat attached or whatever, I won't. I don't want to make any wake, and I want to be safe. But they were like nothing. So it seems to be, and it's fun. But did I do any donuts or any showboating beforehand? No, and I got witnesses who were on the boat on the day of
I
the
think
accident.
you answered the
Yeah.
questions.
So,
Okay.
If there are
Anything
no
else?
more questions, we'll return to our seats.
I think we're good, thank you.
thanks.
All right, well, getting back to the recommendation that's before us. Is there any questions or anything? Would someone like to make a recommendation?
I recommend that we approve staff's recommendation.
Do we have a second on that?
I'll second.
Okay. We have a first and second on that. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Okay, I think it passes unanimously. And I think we all understand that Mr. Laurie has been a long-time person in the harbor and has contributed significantly to the city and the harbor, and I would encourage him to reapply for it in a year or so. So thank you.
When is the next window application?
Can staff answer that?
You don't know? You don't know?
August 1st.
Pardon me?
August 1st.
August 1st, okay. Thank you.
Okay, moving ahead here. New business.
There's something seriously wrong with that microphone.
Neither one.
Okay, are we ready for new business? The Go ahead.
Item 7, fiscal year 2018 mid-year budget report. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive and review a status report on the Waterfront Department fiscal year 2018 mid-year budget revenues and expenditures.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. As Ms. Przinski just said, I'm going to provide you with a brief mid-year budget report. We're halfway through the fiscal year, which, as you know, begins July 1st and ends the following year, June 30th. I'm going to start off here with the first chart you're going to see includes, going from left to right, our 4 revenue programs with the Waterfront Department, our budget that was approved for fiscal year 18. In the third column, you'll see where we are year-to-date actual, and that is through December 31st of 2017. The next column provides our fiscal year 18 projection. That's where we figure we will end come June 30th. And we do that. We have a 3-year seasonally weighted average, and so we plug in our numbers, and we come out with what we think is where we're going to end at the end of the fiscal year. To the right of that is the year-end variance, how it stacks up as far as dollars and cents, and then to the final column on your right is that number in a percentage. So starting off, our property management program, as you can see, through December 31st is down 4.9% versus, I guess what you should say is compared to what it has been in the past. And you'll see it's interesting. We've had a summer that was kind of normal, a little foggy here and there. It wasn't hot as it has been in previous years and sunny and perfect weather. We kind of had a normal summer. And then when fall approached, as you remember, September and October were blazing hot. So interesting weather patterns, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So we've seen those property management revenues go down a bit. And I'll get back to that as I go through these other revenue programs. Our financial management is controlled by the finance department. That's up about 13%. Doesn't equate to much, but we'll take it. Our parking services, as you'll see, this is kind of rare. It's down just shy of 1%. Again, I think weather patterns and things like that had something to do with it. And then the one stronghold we have this year is marina management. We've seen, and I'll get into this in a little bit, an increase in our transfer fee revenue. It's, again, we're having quite the first half of the year. And once you take all that in, we predict that we'll be just above our projected revenues, about 0.5% or $75,000. Last year at this time, it was about 1% and $130,000. So, you know, we're kind of in the ballpark. But what I can tell you is that we've had 2, as you know, enormous natural disasters, the Thomas Fire and the mudslides. Parking services, that revenue figure you see is basically live, for lack of a better term. We're able to calculate all that information on a daily basis. The property management is actually a little behind in the sense that the percentage rent tenants have paid part of their rent, but they haven't paid the percentage part. It takes a little while for them to figure that out. So that hasn't come through in December. As you recall, that the whole month of December was basically the Thomas Fire. Then turn around, I know we're not talking about January yet, early January, the mudslides. We've got an issue with the 101. Our parking lots are quite empty, although in addition to what Mr. Reedman said, we've been doing a whole lot of work with the emergency crews, putting up emergency vehicles in our lots. Tomorrow, Caltrans is bringing in K-Rail to be placed eventually up in Montecito. That's all being stored in our Cabrillo West lot. So we are trying to help these folks, Montecito Union School District. We're helping them, giving them free parking for their kids and their staff so they can continue classes at Santa Barbara City College. So what I'm saying in a roundabout way is you're going to see these numbers go down in the future as time goes on. We'll keep you apprised of the magnitude of that. We're hoping to rebound, obviously, once everything gets cleared out, and hopefully we'll get people back in the city, coming downtown. But we will keep you apprised, and we'll adjust the budget if necessary. This next spreadsheet is our expenditures at mid-year. Sorry, it doesn't quite fit on this quite well. but you're used to that with all these budget presentations. Big picture, when you take everything into account, year to date, well, I should say through December 31st, we're at about 56, almost 57% of our budget. You can see most of these categories, or a number of the categories, are below the 50% level halfway through the year. A few anomalies you'll see: total salaries and benefits are down a little bit, and that's because at the start of the year, fiscal year, we had a couple openings in Harbor Patrol. As noted earlier, Mr. Ingebretson is now the supervisor, and we've got some young folks coming in to fill the 2 open roles below. We're also currently now out for a job. We're trying to hire for another Harbor Patrolman. Whew. Okay. A couple other things in there. You'll see our transfers to capital. That's money we shift over to the capital program. That's always front-loaded. We like to get that money over as soon as July 1st hits so we can get those projects up and running and get construction and whatnot going. Non-capitalized outlays, small increase. I can tell you that's likely due to the purchase of we purchased 5 defibrillators, and we placed them in city locations on the wharf, in the harbor kiosk, parking kiosks, and a number of other locations accessible primarily by our staff, but also in case of emergency, the public. So we put those 5 AEDs out there, in addition to a number of others that Harbor Patrol purchased. Our principal and interest for our debt is always front-loaded. We pay a lot of that right up front at the start of the year. And again, in the end, we anticipate that we'll come in below budget as far as expenditures are concerned. And that is a brief mid-year budget report, and I'm happy to answer any questions. As you know, this is kind of the start of the budget process, the mid-year report this month. Next month, I'll give you an overview of fiscal year 19. The following month, March, I'll bring back 19. You'll be sick of me by that time, but I'm going to show up anyway, so I'm just prepping you for that.
All right. Any questions? Eric?
Yes. How many AEDs are around the harbor area, the immediate harbor area with the wharf, and total of 5?
We have 5 that we just placed. Sorry, Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Chair, Commissioner McCray, we have 5 that we just placed out, Harbor Kiosk, and a number of other locations, including out on the wharf. And then Harbor Patrol purchased a separate 5, a more advanced type of AED that they are trained to use as well. So 10 total.
And Harbor Patrol carries 1.
That's correct.
Do you have plans to have them in more places around the harbor in the future?
I think that would be a good idea as time and funding permits. We're going to see how these work. You know, they have to be, as my understanding, they have to be replaced every certain number of years. But it's a great tool for the common citizen to use. It's very self-explanatory. We're all going through training, and it's pretty darn simple. So it's a really neat tool that could very easily save some lives.
Right. They make survivors.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate you noting. I think we all saw through December, we all have friends and family that have businesses here in town, that it was a very, very difficult holiday period from a retail point of view and business point of view. And I think, you know, the numbers you say will probably reflect that as we move forward. But I do appreciate that the waterfront is working with every agency possible to make it to make this recovery as swift as possible. So I just want to say thank you.
Anything else? I had a couple, Brian. So when you were talking about revenue, you said that we received the rent from the people, which are the base rent, but we haven't received the percentage rent yet. So are those actuals, or are they actuals with projection on what percentage rent you will receive? If you understand what I'm saying.
Mr. Chair, those are actuals as of December 31st. So what happens, and maybe Mr. Reedman can explain a little more detail, is that we're always a month in arrears when it comes to the percentage rent component of the leases. So we haven't quite had the submissions from December, and then again, you know, January will be in February. So we're always playing a little catch up.
And so that's the way you report it consistently. So at the end of the fiscal year, we will still have not received June percentage rent. And I understand this is only, it happens once, and then for the rest of your life, it's always that way.
Mr. Chair, generally by the time we give you the year-end report, it's already September.
Right.
So we've had July, or at least August. So we've had all of July and a good part of August if we do it in August. So there is time to get those actual everything included numbers by that point in time. So it's just now that it's in the middle of the year, we're kind of in that
So
transition
mid-year,
stage.
we don't have the percentage rent in there, but at the end of the year, when we close the books, we have it in there.
That's correct.
Great.
Mr. Chair, if I may add, we're on an accrual system of accounting.
Right.
So the revenue is booked to our system when the bills are kicked off. So at the first of the month, all that posts as revenue, even though we might not have received any of that rent at all.
Right. It's not a cash basis.
Right. So, but the cash comes in towards the end of the month, the base rents, the slip rents, and so forth.
Right.
But it's already booked on the first when the billing's kicked off. The percentage rent comes on the 15th of the following month. So right around right now, we're getting percentage rent checks in for December.
Right.
So the same thing, and that won't post until the percentage rent is billed, which will happen in February. So December percentage won't book until February.
Right.
So what happens is as we approach the end of the fiscal year, I think the cutoff is May, because, or actually it's probably April, because you get the percentage on May 15th. No, but it's charged June 1st. So yeah, it would be a May. The May would be your last month where you would see any percentage rent reflected in that year. So it's...
So you don't wait till you receive the June and credit it back to the...
That goes into the next fiscal year.
Okay. Okay, so it is just a one-time deal.
Yeah.
It happens once when you open your books the first time, and then for every year, you're still getting 12 months of percentage rent because you're picking up 1 month from last year and then 11 months from
And what
this year.
happens is it tends to front load the first 2 quarters of the fiscal year because you're getting the good months. You're starting to see May and June and July. So by mid-year, you've got the whole summer in there and the spring as well. So it does tend to front load our property management percentage rent.
Okay. And then, and I understand this is kind of nuanced, so excuse me. But the second thing is so Ryan, when will we see the first look at the effects of these recent disasters, do you think?
Mr. Chair, based on the schedule that Mr. Reedman provided is how the funding comes in, probably not until late February or March.
Yeah, I was thinking more on your timing. You know, you mentioned being in front of us several times talking the budget in the near future. And I was just wondering when we might.
I would hope to have those by time we come with the budget recommendation, which would be in March, because that really what we project out for this year is going to help us look at next year and what we project as far as revenues and expenditures. So we do use those numbers to then formulate next year's budget. So I would anticipate and hope, I guess I should say, that we'll have those as part of that March meeting for you folks.
And on the expense side, if I remember correctly, we have some benefit payments in the first part of the year. Isn't that some of the benefit payments front-loaded or something that add to that?
If you're sorry, Mr. Chair, are you talking about our debt service?
No,
or our
employee
salaries and benefits?
Employee benefits, yeah. The CalPERS.
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that actually.
And then what's the
I can look and I can talk with HR and find out.
What's the $1 million encumbrances?
So those are
$1 million.
Sorry, those are basically things that have been in your report. We stated as promise. So projects and programs.
Oh, right. CIP stuff.
CIP, everything from consultants and things like that for bird surveys. All those kind of things added together are encumbrances where we're under contract to then we encumber those right at the start of the year and they're paid throughout the year.
Okay, maybe that's what I remember.
Yeah, a good example of that is the work incorporated janitorial contract. You encumber the whole $250,000 or whatever it is at the beginning of the year, and then you pay it out on a monthly basis. So it looks like you've paid the whole thing, but it goes out in 1/12.
That's what I remember. It wasn't the benefits; it was that.
And other contracts.
The contracts
like that.
we booked the total expense up front. Okay, great. Thank you for indulging me in that. Okay, go ahead. Any other questions on this exciting stuff? Okay, moving ahead.
Item 8, berthing policy, designated commercial fishing slips. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a report on the berthing policy for designated commercial fishing slips in Santa Barbara Harbor and recommend no changes to Resolution 14-023 adopted by City Council on May 13th, 2014.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, in 2001, your commission recommended the City Council approve policy guidelines governing specially designated slips, commercial fishing slips in Santa Barbara Harbor. Those are the ones circled up here on the map. They essentially include 42 slips at Fish Float North, Fish Float South, and Marina 1A. There are actually 3 others that lie outside this bubble that were added to this policy during the 1999 and 2000 Marina 1 expansion project. City Council adopted the policy by resolution in 2001, and the point of it was to make sure that the city did everything it could to support its commercial fishing industry and maintain the good standing of its working waterfront. We happen to be one of the most solid working waterfronts, immodestly, if I might, one of the most solid working waterfronts on the California coast, certainly south of Point Conception. If you add in the facilities we maintain, the hoist, the ice machine, and what have you, and the slips are a big component of that. So Council adopted the policy by resolution with the intention to review it every 5 years, which it was a couple times, and ultimately your commission recommended and the Council accepted the notion that reviewing it every 3 years was appropriate. The last time it was reviewed was 2014, and this brief report tonight represents a summary of the 2017 review. And so basically what I did was in December, I sent letters to, staff sent letters to all the folks inside that bubble, all the slip permittees, in December, inviting them to a January 4th meeting to discuss any potential changes they wanted to see to the resolution, which is attached to your staff report tonight. I explained what's written here, what I just told you, and invited them to the meeting. I received one phone call from an individual who said, I can't make the meeting, but no changes. And then 3 fishermen two fishermen showed up to the meeting, and they expressed support for the resolution as it stands, which was kind of confirming, if you will, that we ironed out most of the bugs and that it's not broken. They did underscore the notion that they wanted to keep the earnings requirement at $15,000 and not raise it, owing to sort of a confluence of impacts to the fishing industry, including regulatory, the cost of fishing. And when I say regulatory, this is the function of closed areas and having to spend more fuel to get to areas that are open and all those kinds of things, making it harder functionally to earn money from commercial fishing. You received in your packet a late letter from Gaetano Moreno, I believe, and he was supporting the notion of supporting aquaculture. And as a respectful reminder, aquaculture is included in the definition of commercial fishing, so anywhere in this bubble here, or the 3 outlying slips in Marinas 1 and 4, aquaculture is permitted in a designated commercial fishing slip. He does note in his letter about the expanding aquaculture operations in Ventura. I should just mention to you that if we have this discussion in the future, this is not an issue that's not without, not surprisingly when it comes to fishing, not without its various viewpoints and perspectives, especially because while aquaculture is actually, the state has mandated a support for aquaculture, what happens is you get the perception of the reality of area preclusion. So I'm fishing in Area A on one day, and the next thing I know, the Fish and Game Commission, the California Fish and Game Commission, approves a huge aquaculture site, and I can't go fishing there anymore. So there are political tensions in that regard, but that's to Mr. Moreno's letter, aquaculture is approved under the commercial fishing definition. We would certainly welcome any approved aquaculture operations in the area. But in summary, the current resolution basically maintains a slip fee break for all those people who are covered under the resolution. It started with everybody in the fish floats north and south, all were grandfathered in. Okay, then the folks in Marina 1A were offered the option of opting into the 50% basically slip fee option in exchange for having to prove commercial fishing earnings. They could have just stayed at a normal slip rate and not paid the earnings. And over time and through transition and slip transfers, now we're at a point where 35 of the 45 designated commercial fishing slips are under this rubric where they need to prove fishing earnings, which is actually a good thing. You know, it's showing to us anyway that those slips are being utilized functionally by boats that are bringing fish and shellfish products into Santa Barbara for various fisheries. So in the end, the fishermen that we spoke with had recommended to us that the resolution be maintained as is. Staff supports that recommendation and advances to you tonight that recommendation to leave 14023, Resolution 14023, as it is without amendments. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Mr. Cronman, thank you. Is there any waiting list or is there any demand for more commercial fishing slips?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Spicer, we have about 60 to 80 fishing families, if you will, fishing boats in Santa Barbara Harbor. So besides these 45, the rest are scattered throughout the harbor. I think if the fishermen had their way, there would be more designated commercial fishing slips. But we have an obligation to balance designated commercial fishing slips, which come with considerable benefit relative supporting the fleet, with recreational slips for sailboats and power boats and what have you. So it's staff's opinion that we're sort of at the sweet spot right now. But the answer is yes. If other fishermen out there had their way, and there's some of them out there that earn a lot of money, they would like to be in designated commercial fishing slips, but we're not of a mind at this time to designate other slips as commercial fishing only.
Noted. Thank you.
Sure.
Anything else? Okay. I don't think there's a recommendation to approve it. So
There is.
just to receive a report.
No, I think there's a recommendation, isn't there?
No, Harbor receive a report.
Recommend
I'll
no
recommend
changes.
no changes be made to this, send it forward to the City Council for approval.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Okay. Moving ahead here. It's lease time.
Item 9, proposed lease agreement with the Chamber of Commerce of the Santa Barbara region. Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and recommend City Council approval of a 5-year lease agreement with the Chamber of Commerce of Santa Barbara region for the 400 square foot visitor center site at 1 Garden Street.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. This is the first of 3 leases, all relatively small in dollar figures, but nonetheless very important to the harbor community. This first lease is with the Chamber of Commerce of the Santa Barbara region, otherwise known as the Chamber. As Ms. Przinski said, it's located at 1 Garden Street. It's approximately 400 square feet, and it is on the corner of Cabrillo Boulevard here and Garden Street. So very prominent, a lot of tour buses stack up out front. The Chamber of Commerce has leased the visitor center site from the Waterfront Department since 1988, or it has leased a site from the department since 1988. The lease specifies that the use of the site is for a non-profit visitor information center, but they're also allowed to sell incidental items, tour books, educational books, literature, and directories and things like that. The proposed lease terms, this would be a 5-year lease term. The base rent is $0. And just to discuss that a little bit, because that's odd for us, the lease is intended to enable the Chamber to operate the visitor center as a public service. So it's never been intended to be a revenue generator for the waterfront department. It's in support of the city and the region as a whole. However, we do get a percentage rent component from them, and we receive 10% of retail sales in excess of $70,000 a year. So everything above, when their tickets hit $70,000, everything above, we get 10% of that. We have a great working relationship with the chamber as well as the staff there. They're on site. In back there is our Garden Street parking lot, so they're very attuned to what's going on. They report problems or any issues. If they see any activity that shouldn't be there, they're quick to give us a call. One of the things on the percentage rent, or I should say the exclusions from gross sales, is they also sell third-party tickets such as trolley tickets and revenue from their advertising board. That's all theirs. That doesn't come out of, that doesn't go into that $70,000 and the 10%. With that said, the chamber is considered by the department to be a tenant in good standing. They're always prompt with their payments, and we have no issues with them on file. I should let you know that the visitor center is open daily from 9 to 6 p.m. in the summer and 9 to 4 p.m. in the winter. The visitor center staff estimate that they serve approximately 200,000 visitors each year, and the staff consists of 1 full-time, 12 part-time, and approximately 35 volunteers. And again, these folks are really important to us as with our cruise ships. They're out there at the hospitality tent. So again, great relationship with the chamber, and we're happy to have them as a tenant.
Questions, Bill?
Just one small one. Can you ballpark what we do make from this spot?
I sure can.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Spicer, it ends up being anywhere between $2,500 and $3,000 a year.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
And so what do they sell that is in there? I mean, if third-party stuff is out, what? I didn't know the chamber made anything.
Mr. Chair, I encourage everybody to go on down and visit the Chamber of Commerce at 1
I guess
Garden
I just
Street.
showed that I haven't been in there in a while, huh?
No, but they sell tour books, anything Santa Barbara related, calendars, tour books, educational materials, some logo T-shirts and things of that nature. Okay. So when you add all that up, I mean, to get up to $70,000, that's above $70,000, I should say.
Good.
Not too shabby.
I mean, good for them.
And I should let you know that they're in charge of maintaining the inside of the facility. Our staff is in charge of maintaining the adjacent restrooms. So, just
is
to
that
clarify.
part of the Work Incorporated contract?
No, that's actually our staff.
Okay. Okay, Mary, do you have a question? Go ahead.
So there's a small building there that they use, and I believe it was the office for Andrea's wholesale fish processing plant up on State Street, and the Santa Barbara Chamber moved it down there. Who owns that building now?
The City of Santa Barbara Waterfront Department owns it. And yes, it was up on State Street, and then I believe it got picked up and moved as part of the freeway project.
Wow. We're going back, aren't we? Any other questions? Okay, we have a recommendation to approve this lease.
I would forward that.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Okay. Moving ahead.
Item 10, proposed lease agreement with Mike Pizell, Marine Surveyor. Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and recommend City Council approval of a 3-year lease agreement with 2 one-year options with Mike Pizell, a sole proprietorship, at an initial base rent of $451.55 per month for the approximately 164 square feet of second-floor office space designated as 125 Harbor Way, Suite 23.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Mike Pizell has leased an office on the second floor of the Marine Center building at 125 Harbor Way since March of 2008. Mr. Pizell has over 25 years of experience in marine survey and consultation, and although he performs work all up and down the coast, his primary focus and activity is within the Santa Barbara Harbor as well as Ventura and Channel Islands Harbor. He's well known for his magazine articles and his books. He's been around the harbor for quite some time. And again, this is for his space, or I should say, where did we go? Sorry about that. And that. There's Mr. Pizell. And here is the space, suite number 23. This is up on the second floor. Again, 164 square feet. The term, 3-year term with 2 one-year options. That was at Mr. Pizell's request. The base rent, as was stated by Ms. Przinski, $451.55 a month, with annual adjustments for the cost of living based on the Consumer Price Index, and the permitted use, obviously, is as a business office. Mr. Pizell is a tenant in good standing. We have no issues with him on file, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions? Anybody? All right, we have a recommendation to approve this. Someone? Second. Did someone make a first?
First. I'll move that we approve
Make
this.
a motion to approve.
Okay. Betsy will second. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Okay.
Item 11, proposed lease agreement with Harbor Mail Center. Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and recommend to City Council approval of a 5-year lease agreement with David Viazana, doing business as Harbor Mail Center, at an initial base rent of $481.90 per month for the 140 square foot lease space located at 125 Harbor Way, number 6.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I just had a technological glitch, but I think I can walk you through this one quite easily. This third and final lease on your agenda this evening is for the Harbor Mail Center. And Mr. David Viazana has worked at the Harbor Mail Center for many years, and he most recently became the owner in March of 2016. The Harbor Mail Center is an important component of the harbor community, and it offers general mail services as well as UPS and FedEx deliveries. It's also great for visiting boaters, the public, and it has 180 post office P.O. boxes available for rent. His customers include a wide range of folks, everything from local businesses, slip permittees, harbor organizations, and owners of commercial fishing boats. Mr. Viazana has made some cosmetic improvements. I'm not sure if you've been in there recently, but some paint and other things to improve the site, some blinds and whatnot. And he's also offering longer hours for his clientele since taking over the business. The proposed lease terms, 5 years, just almost $482 a month for the space. And it is also subject to annual cost of living increases based on the Consumer Price Index. I should also let you know that the Harbor Mail Center is specifically identified in the Harbor Master Plan as an ocean-related use. It's one of a kind. It's very important to folks around there. I know we use it as the department, it's always got somebody in there. So it's a very well-used business, and Mr. Viazana is a tenant in good standing and has no issues on file with the department.
Okay, any questions? All right, would someone like to make a motion? Okay, second? Second? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Okay. That brings us to Commission Staff Communications. Mr. Reedman, do you have anything?
Mr. Chair, nothing from staff this evening.
Okay. I have one thing. Last month, was it last month or the month before, we had a presentation on the local coastal program update. And in that presentation, we were asked to provide comments to staff if we had any comments on it, and to provide a letter to them. We have since drafted that letter, and it's been approved by the LCP subcommittee of this board, and we just wanted to put it before everybody for approval of the commissioners. So if anybody has any questions or anything, we can certainly go through it, or... Yeah.
Mr. Chair, is this something that we vote or recommend at this point, at this time?
Yeah, I think what it is this was something that we should have put on the agenda, and we didn't get the letter written in time. And so what we're doing is we would like to forward this letter to the city planning commission in support of it. Scott?
Mr. Chair, I'm just a little bit concerned that we're not in a position for the commission to take a vote on an unagendized item. So, but I think it's appropriate that the subcommittee forward the letter to the planning folks.
Okay.
So rather than have a vote,
Right.
I think we should just handle
you're
it that
correct.
way.
We shouldn't vote on it. If anybody had any comments on the letter that the subcommittee wrote, we would like to entertain that and maybe incorporate the changes in the letter before we forward it. So I realize some of you haven't had a chance to see this before tonight, so give you a second to read through it.
Will Wright, written.
Mr. Chair, I had a chance to look it over earlier this evening, and I'm at peace with this.
Okay.
I feel the same.
Okay.
It looks fine to me.
Then we'll go ahead and the subcommittee will forward it to it. So, all right. Anything else? All right. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second? All right. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right. Thank you very much, everybody.